Okay, welcome everybody to Sunday here at Scale 14X. And for our first speaker today in this track, we're going to have Brian Proffitt. Brian will be telling us about finding the value here in open source projects. Brian is currently Principal Community Analyst for Red Hat's Open Source and Standards team. He's a longtime member of the open source software community, and he's authored several books on Linux, iOS, and other odd operating systems. He's also a former technology journalist for ReadWrite, IT World, Linux Planet, and Linux Today. Let's all welcome Brian.
Thank you. Okay, so the topic of this talk is going to be talking about something that's probably near and dear to a lot of people in the open source community. This idea that community and business do not necessarily always get along. This is a common thread throughout a lot of companies. We see this in new startup entrepreneurial situations. We also see this in even established open source companies like Red Hat and SUSE and in Canonical. This is a common thread where there seems to be this little push-pull, pseudo-adversarial, sometimes not pseudo-adversarial relationship between the idea of community and business. And the nature of this talk is to sort of dispel this notion that they have to be at odds with each other at all. And this kind of has come up in my tenure at Red Hat because surprisingly, even though Red Hat is regarded as one of the, purest, for lack of a better term, open source companies out there, there's still a lot of this internal struggle on a daily basis within our different teams. A lot of this is because community can be generally fairly confusing to a lot of people. The approach that people can take with community can vary as wildly between okay, this is a group of users that we're going to respect and we're going to take care of and we're going to give them lots of nice things and make them feel good, to an actual participatory community, whereas we need these people to help us with our project. But even then, that becomes a little bit of a nuanced relationship because sometimes you can do that and say, well, we're using this community as a resource, but that's all we're doing. We're not really going to give them anything back. We're not going to give them a say in what's going on. To what I would regard as better forms of community, which are participatory and on all levels. It's a two-way street. So kind of nailing this down is something that's very important when we all look at community and try to figure out what it is we want and what it is we should be doing. And I think that even if companies have different goals with community, there's still some basic rules of the road that they should follow and make life better for everybody, even if it does seem like it's a drain on resources or we're giving something away and not getting anything back. Because this confusion can create a divide. This divide shows up in any open source company out there. I named a few earlier, but I could probably universally say that if you can think of a commercial company that is working with open source in any way, shape, or form, there is going to be, at some point, and probably more often than you think, a divide between what is regarded as the traditional business side versus the community side. And how that divide is bridged is an interesting case, because sometimes what we see is that the divide will actually be bridged by, let's say, okay, well, let's make community part of marketing. Okay, and if it's part of marketing, we understand marketing. Marketing is a business function. We will make it part of that, and we will treat it like that as a marketing line item, basically. Okay, that's a way to go, but it might not necessarily be the best way to go, because at that point you're getting into the point where you're treating that community as a resource to be mined, and that is probably not your best approach to handling community. Um, when you think about how businesses think of community, businesses traditionally are very much lined up along the bottom line. That's what a business does. If you're a public company in most countries, you're required by law to make as much money as you can. And if you're a private company, you're pretty much going to feel the same way. You're trying to get as much revenue that you can squeeze out of your product and your company and your team as you can. Okay, it's crass, but money is a very big driver here. Okay, and I'm not really saying anything that's like hugely new. But, when you think about it from a project point of view, and I've kind of been dinging business a little bit and putting this all on them and saying, well, they don't understand community. Well, there's the opposite problem too. Let's be fair. A lot of community projects that work with corporate entities often feel like we're not about the money, man. We don't want to be, dealing with that. That's not our problem. We're here to create something good and pure and solid. So they sort of, they can almost be, from the opposite side, adversarial and stiff-arming, commercial entities and trying to keep them away. So it's, it takes two to tango. So it's not just the businesses maltreating the communities can kind of be the same way about the businesses as well. This can be an adversarial relationship at times, okay? And it doesn't have to be, okay? Community, it can be regarded as a resource, but it doesn't have to be the kind of resource that is like set up in its own little area and self-contained, and it doesn't do anything else beyond that. People don't always get community, but people know that they want it. So many companies want to have a community. Obviously, Red Hat, we want to have a community going, and we do. With a lot of many of our open source projects, in fact, well, all of them that we actually directly support. But it's not just pure open source companies like Red Hat. McAfee, they have a community infrastructure. Google does. EMC, Canonical, just going down, Charles Schwab. When I was researching this, I'm like, okay, they want to have a community manager, but their community is around their users, and that's okay. That's a viable community. But, what does that look like as far as participation? What does that look like for growth? What does that look like for people? How did they, what do their users get out of this, and what does Charles Schwab get out of this? How many people here remember when Saturns came out, the cars? Do you remember that they had, they used to have the cool picnics and everything like that, and you would have the commercials on the TV and everything, and you would literally, I was too poor to buy a new car at that point in my life, but I was like literally sitting there thinking, I want to get a Saturn so I can go to these picnics, and show up. That was actually, I got to give GM props for that. That was a cool idea for a community, and it was a brilliant strategy for getting people invested and inclusive in this community of Saturn owners. And I have a soft spot in my heart for Saturns because of that. Then I actually drove one, and maybe not so much, but whatever. Tom's, the shoes company, buy one, give one. They have a community infrastructure as well. But where do they get the value? Each one of those companies that I mentioned has a different form of community. Red Hat's communities are about developing code. They're about building projects. They're about, contributory free and open source software projects. That's vastly different goals than Tom's, and Charles Schwab, who are both very much in the user community point of view. So how are they going to get value out of their communities? Why are they bothering with this? And the cynical part of us can sit here and say, you know what, they're not really into community. They're just doing this as a marketing strategy. They're just doing this to try to get people to feel good and feel nice, when basically what they're setting up is a bunch of targeted users that they can get online on and monitor and track and get their habits and whatnot, and figure out how to sell things better. Yeah, that may be true. Okay. The problem is this. When software companies do this with free and open source software projects, that becomes a problem. There's very little chance for me if my daughters buy Toms all the time. They love the shoes. They love the idea of the buy one, give one, and they're good shoes. So they love them, but they're never going to ever contribute a design for a new shoe to Toms. That's not what that community is about. They're going to vote with their pocketbook. So if a shoe line is successful, it's not because people participated in the creation of that shoe line. It's because people were buying and voting with their cash. So we have to be very careful here, because there's been a trend lately, and that's sort of the origin of this talk, where a lot of companies in software land who are distributing open source code are taking that idea of community as a marketing arm, and they're running a little bit far with that. Now, I want to be very careful when I continue with this talk. As you go, you might be hearing threads of things that he doesn't like the Apache license. He doesn't like permissive licenses, because that means companies are trying to steal things. That is actually not what this is about. I have no problems with restrictive licenses. I have no problems with permissive licenses. Okay? How you act with a license is what we're going to be kind of judging you by. Okay? You can still have full participation with a permissive license, or not. Okay? But you still have to deliver value to your community, and when you do that, you're going to get full value for your company as well. So let's look at one side of this. Let's look at the business value and where they get. What does a business need when they talk about value? Well, okay, so the business value, or as far as community, sorry. So again, and I've said this several times already, the business value for a community, it's obviously, okay, one, it's good marketing. And even at Red Hat, we do this. The fact that we're, over at the next building, we've got a booth over there, we've got stickers, we've got T-shirts, we've got swag, we've got brochures, all these things, and all of our companies that are here are doing this. We are advocating our communities, okay? We are holding them up to the world, and we are saying, these are the communities that we work with, and we are happy to work with them, and we want you to be a part of them. Okay? You will never be able to separate marketing from community in a commercial infrastructure. Okay? It can't be done, nor should it be done. So I'm not here saying, let's just kill off this idea that community as marketing is a bad thing. It's always going to be there. That's part of my job as a community analyst. It's part of any community manager's job. If they do any form of advocacy, that is marketing. And to do that, when they do that, they're building loyalty. I'm building brand loyalty with stickers. I'm building project loyalty with, hopefully a low barrier to entry for participation. And getting people good documentation so they can jump into their project more easily. Brand awareness, mentioned that already. Support, and I'm sorry, my slides here are very tiny, so I'm having trouble reading it ahead of time. That's another value for community. And a lot of software companies are actually, this is a big part of what they do with community as well. It's easier to support your software when your community is there helping. If I could, save a little money, and if I have an active and vibrant user community, and somebody comes along and says, hey, I'm having a problem with feature X, Y, or Z, and it's great if there's a user mailing list or a forum somewhere where I can point them and I can say, hey, go here first, see if somebody's asked that same question. And it's wonderful if that question's already been answered. Your community has done your support work for you. So you've reduced your support costs. So that's a great business value for community. On the product side, you're going to get a higher adoption rate. And this is actually something, I'll be honest, this is something we do at Red Hat all the time, and this is something that SUSE does, and Canonical is doing as well. The more people that use Overt, which is a virtual data center management platform, and I kind of pick on it because that was my last community manager role, the more people that use that, by mere attrition alone, we're going to pick up some commercial users of Rev, which is the commercial downstream. The more people that use Fedora or CentOS, the more people that we're going to see pick up RHEL, okay, which is where we sell the support for, and this is where we generate revenue. I could say the same thing about the relationship between OpenSUSE and SUSE. And there's nothing wrong with that. We're all open about this. This is the thing. If you want to run OpenSUSE in the enterprise and you can do it and make that work, SUSE is all for that, And if you need some help along the way, they've got the infrastructure and the ecosystem that they'd like to invite you in and be a part of their commercial product. Same thing with Canonical, same thing with Red Hat, and so forth and so on. Having a strong and vibrant community brings a definite bottom line value add as far as higher adoption rate of your commercial product, just by mere attrition alone. And you're gonna see more spending on product as you go. So you're gonna adopt the product later, and long term, if a community is strong, we've seen evidence that you're going to end up getting a lot more spending on the product long term. Now, these are actually not my ideas. Erica Cole from Salesforce, and I've got this URL. It probably won't be very visible on the video, but I do invite you to go back and look at the slides that were with this presentation and pull that URL up, because she does a very good, detailed explanation of the value of community from the Salesforce side, And this is coming from a company that is not necessarily regarded as an open source company, really. But a lot of what she is saying is true for software in particular, and pretty much any business, whether it's open source or not. Now, the community reaction to a lot of this, and I hinted at this before, that the community's not always friendly about this, is not the most positive thing in the world, okay? It's gotten a lot better, but in the past, I remember when 2001, when IBM started making the rounds and investing $1 billion in Linux software development, and Red Hat was becoming prominent, and Oracle was coming in and being a big player. People were very wary of business people. They wanted to stay pure. I'm going to stay with Debian because I do not want to sell my soul to you. And we still see that. And I'm not making fun of that attitude at all. That is a totally valid, if you don't want to have any dealings with commercial entities, fine. That's because commercial entities, I work for one, but we're not perfect, And because of our size, we can do unintentional damage sometimes. And I can respect that people do not want to be involved in that. But so the community reaction to a business's approach to community is usually one that is regarded with suspicion and definitely wariness, if not outright suspicion. So so we talked about the value of community as far as products are concerned. Okay, how do we what does a project get out of community? Well, obviously growth. When you are a community manager, one of the first things you're going to try to do, if you haven't done it already, is measure the growth of your community. And that can be measured in a whole bunch of different ways. Because the idea is basically this: the more your project is growing, the stronger it is. If you have people leaving your project in droves, there's a problem. And it might not even be your problem. It could be that there's better technology down the road. You know, I don't want to really contribute to this project anymore. I want to go and contribute to project Y because I think their stuff is cooler. And then that leads to a or you have people who leave where they're saying, I want to leave because I don't like the way this project is run. Or I'm having a personality problem with the people at the top. These are all valid reasons why people leave. So obviously then growth indicates that your project is going to be stronger, okay? But you can't count on that because that can turn on you in a second. So you got to look at trends more than like day-to-day things. You got to make sure that things are still growing at the rates that they need to be, and keeping that growth rate up and running. The more you grow, the more resources you have. The more talent you have in your community, the more diversity you have in your community as far as talent and backgrounds and everything, gender, race, everything like that. The more resources you have. Cultural differences make a difference. People from different cultures and different backgrounds and different education will bring something new to the table all the time, okay? You don't want to be like the little gated community of all one ethnic group or income level. That's boring. All the houses are the same. You know, what's the value there? Those people seem to be happy because they're living in their little gated community. But other than, you know, you want to be a part of that, what's the value of that community really? How does that community grow? How does that community maintain loyalty? These are problems. And I'm a big believer in the more you grow, the more resources you have, and you really need to have that for you. Advocacy, okay, that's another value that community brings to a project. The more people who are using it, the more people are going to just be advocates for it. You know, well, not all of us, I know people who don't, but a lot of us, and hold this up as a visual here, I'm kind of taped down. You know, we've got stickers. You know, I love pulling this thing out on an airplane. Because people, like, normal people, you know, and I don't mean to disparage, but sometimes I call them muggles. You know, they don't have that going. And they look at it and they're like, what are you? Because, you know, I'm kind of an older gentleman, you know, and everything like that. And, you know, I'm pretty like, you know, Leave It to Beaver kind of guy looking. And, you know, they're like, what are you a hippie? What is this going on here? You know? But this is what we do in community all the time. This goes back to ancient tribal, you know, I'm not a sociologist, but I'm sure it's some sort of tribe. I'm part of this tribe. I've got a sticker. You know, we got people at Red Hat to get the fedora tattoos. I'm like, no, that's not happening. But they do that because it's part of advocacy, and that's a very powerful reason to have a strong community in a project. That helps people understand the project. Okay. So if somebody comes up to you and says, I don't understand what this does, the better, you know, the stronger, more vibrant your community, the easier it is it's going to be to explain it to people. They're going to have this sense of community, and they're hopefully going to help people understand the project better. The other thing that you want to do with advocacy is communicate how useful it is to participants. It's not just enough for me to say that Overt is a virtual data center management platform. I need to be able to, as a community member, communicate that how useful it is to use someone outside of my community who hasn't used it. Okay? How is this going to be useful to you? Okay? And build that up and use community resources to help get that message across. And then this is really nuanced because it seems like it's the same thing. So now I've explained to you how useful Overt is. I really haven't, but we're short on time. But hypothetically, I've explained it to you, okay, and what it will do for you. Now I actually have to tell you how to use it. How do you install it? How do you get these virtual machines from one host to another? It's documentation. Okay. And that's something community also needs to bring too. So these are the three areas of advocacy that a community can do for you and should do for you if you're a project, a software project. And then the benefits of this, and this may seem a little bit familiar, just like on the business side, for the project will have a higher adoption rate if the community is strong. Oh, you know, so-and-so, my friend over here, he's using Debian. He likes that. You know, he really, really likes that. It's gotten really strong. It's not as hard to install anymore because, does anybody remember how hard it was to install Debian? Yeah, I almost shot my computer the first time I did it back in the early 2000s. It was very painful, but that is no longer a thing. Debian is like as easy to install as any other distribution now, except maybe Gentoo, because I still don't understand that, and that's my fault, not theirs. More project recognition. These parts tie in very, very well. The value of community is much closer to an alignment with business side here. Okay, you get the higher adoption rate. You get more project recognition. Sorry. Okay. So community versus commercial, the age-old problem that we have, because they do tend to be at loggerheads sometimes, and we see this a lot. It's the upstream, downstream model, and different companies are going to deal with this in different ways. It is very important, and I'll deliver this lesson from a Red Hat point of view, and you take that with a grain of salt as you want, because not everybody does it the way we do. But one of the things that we have found that is very, very, very important to differentiate between the work that is done in the upstream project versus the work that is done in the downstream project, okay? And how that work is done, okay? So, give you an example. One of the things, oh shoot, I gotta peek at my phone here for a second because I just had a brain. Okay, Slack, sorry. I was trying to think of the name of the app. Okay, so has everybody heard of Slack as a chatting app and things like this? Okay, so actually this is something that we're actually talking about a little bit at Red Hat, because a lot of people, especially on the business side, the sales side and everything like that, they don't really like IRC. And you know, I kind of don't blame them, because if you look at IRC from somebody who hasn't been using it forever, it's a really simplified, arcane system. Even if you're using something pretty like XChat or something like that, I'm hardcore, I'm in IRSSI, so I'm doing command line IRC, but I get that. XChat is very limited. It's just sort of like, hey, how are you? Hey, how are you? And you're watching channels and things like that. Slack is more interesting to people, okay, at Red Hat. And there's been a movement lately of saying, hey, we really should think about adopting Slack as an internal communications tool, and blah, 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 blah. And it's like, yeah, and I've got Slack on my phone. I use it to talk to some team members, usually when we're here, when we're out at conferences, because I can't really get IRC very well on my phone, like persistently. So it's nice to have Slack as a side channel where I can say, hey, we need to go to In-N-Out Burgers now, right? And yeah, because we're so sophisticated, But that's what we need it for. So we're using it, it's fine. But the problem that we're having, and this gets to the upstream, downstream thing, is that if Red Hat were to adopt and start using Slack almost exclusively for chat, then we would see an adoption fall off very quickly of IRC. And the problem there is, if we're running Red Hat, a domain redhatslack.com, right? What happens to the communities? Okay, because we use IRC predominantly to talk to our community members who do not work for Red Hat. They are not behind our firewall, They're communicating with us on public channels. If we move to a private channel that's inside our firewall, that's great for us. That's terrible for our communities. So that is a current kind of real-time example of one way you have to make sure that you keep resources dedicated and focused, dedicated on the upstream, and do it on the upstream first. Okay? One of the challenges we had, again, overt, because I'm familiar with it, one of the challenges that we had at overt, and we still do, is our documentation was terrible. Okay? And what was happening was, we have a team at Red Hat that works on the documentation as part of our support structure. So part of the value add that you get if you buy a commercial support for any of our products is you get training, you get support, and you get documentation. Okay? But what was happening was the upstream documentation in overt was terrible. Okay? It still kind of is. We're working on it, I swear to God. Okay? But it's bad. And then what would happen was the commercial people would basically be writing the documentation for the commercial product only from scratch. Okay, and it was better, and they were delivering it, and they're delivering it to their customers. That's not our customers. Sorry, that's not the right way to do that. And they know that. Okay, they know that. But then there's a couple of things. One is they say, well, they turn to the upstream and they say, well, you guys really need to get something better because we're using overt.org is based on MediaWiki. They're using, DocBook-based documentation. So through Publican, MediaWiki does not deal well because MediaWiki is a wiki, and this is a semantic text language down here in the downstream. These two things do not talk to each other at all. It's really awful and ugly and evil. So first off, they're turning to us and say, you guys need a better website. And we're like, okay. But then we're like to them, we're like, we need you guys to actually stop writing for the downstream and start writing for overt and do that in the upstream. Work on that first. And then you should, if we've got the right platform for you, because admittedly we don't now, but we're moving to it, then hypothetically you should be writing all the documentation in overt, and then when it's time to release a commercial version, you just push a button, rebrand everything, and say, boom, there's your commercial version. So even companies like Red Hat are not perfect here. So the important thing is two things. Know where the boundaries are between upstream and downstream. Make sure you are dedicating resources to the upstream. Make sure they're separate from the downstream. And really, this is personal bias, but I think this is the right way to go, dedicate those resources more to the upstream, less to the downstream. Let the downstream take care of itself. I think personally for me, 75 to 80% of the work should be done in the upstream project. The rest should be done in the downstream as an afterthought where you rebrand everything and you secure everything and you lock features down and do what you need to do. Another thing that we see in community versus commercial as a way of bridging this gap is the notion of open core. Open core basically says our software is open, okay, and you can have the free version, but it's not going to be as full featured as the version that we'll sell you. And we don't do this at Red Hat at all. There are differences between Fedora and RHEL, obviously, okay? But there's not, those differences are related to the fact that we're trying to stabilize things. We gotta use more stable code that is enterprise ready. Fedora is great, it's not enterprise ready, okay? But we're not when we give you RHEL, we're not handing you crippleware, okay? We're not saying, this is something that's less than Fedora. We're saying, no, this is just more stable and secure than Fedora. Okay. Open core, these companies will be handing you things that are not as, they're deliberately not as feature rich. If you want these features, you're going to have to pay us money for them. Okay. And a lot of people look at that and they say, well, okay, but if I know that going in, fine. That's cool. At least they're upfront about it. They're not really trying to trick me or anything like that. But the classic problem there is this. Say I'm offering in my software the ability to have, you know, talk to a mobile app, you know, and that's part of the full-featured sellable version of the program. And then along comes this new hot young developer and, you know, real hot shot, and she says something along the lines of, hey, I know a way we can make this work, and I figured this out, and we can upload the code. Guarantee you what's going to happen is that the people who run, you know, the company that runs that project is going to reject that code. Because even though somebody's come along and said, I can do this, and I can do this much more efficiently, and we can talk to the mobile app and everything like that, they don't want that to happen because they don't want that in the free software version. Because then what would they sell? You know, that's a classic problem. So what's that developer going to do? She's going to feel devalued, you know, not going to feel like her work was taken seriously. And worse for the company involved, ironically, she'll modify the code and take it to a competitor who has a more open project. You know, and suddenly now they have that feature. Whoops. Community diversity. And I want to be very, very, very clear here. I support diversity in all forms, race, gender, religion, whatever, okay? But at this point, the context of diversity is how many people work on your project that work for the company and then don't work for the company, okay? And we have stats on this. We have dashboards on all of the projects that our open source and standards group and Red Hat supports, okay? And I will tell you with absolutely no pride whatsoever that for Overt, again, the one that I'm the most familiar with, the last time I looked at this stat, which I think was in November, 88% of the contributors on Overt work for Red Hat. That's not good. That is not diverse, because that's a problem, because that basically means if you don't work for Red Hat and you want to contribute to a project like Overt, you're going to feel like, why would I even do this? Because if they don't want to see this feature, they're not going to accept it, because they have a plan for Overt and they have a plan for Rev, and they're going to go with that plan. I will tell you that is not true, but that's just one guy. You don't know me from Adam. You're going to look at 88% of participants are Red Hat, and you're going to be like, yeah, no, he's blowing smoke, you know. So you need to try to make your communities as diverse as you can and get outside people in as much as you can. And that is a very, very, very hard thing for commercial entities to accept, because they feel like that is a loss of control. I was talking to somebody from Chef about this last night, and he actually brought up an example where because of their governance structure and some things that had happened, and I don't remember exactly how this worked, but basically there was a period of time where Chef was, in their governance structure, was being managed by people who are not employees of Chef. You know, I don't think that lasted very long, and I don't think that was like alarming. It just sort of happened, and everybody was cool with it, and everything was fine. And then they had another round of elections later, and it kind of shifted back. But think about that for a minute. The level of trust that Chef had, and I wish I had more details to share with you and make this story more real. But just even hearing at a cursory level, the level of trust that Chef had for their community, to let that happen was amazing. You know, that would be great. I'm sure it was probably scary, you know, but wow, the fact that the community was that diverse and let them happen is really, really good stuff. So the conflict, we go back and forth with this a lot. Another example I wanted to kind of give you was the age-old argument that we have inside Red Hat, which is talking about, you know, our salespeople look at open source as an obstacle, okay? And they don't really have anything against open source. It's just that if I'm going to be selling you RHEL, okay, and we now have direct support of CentOS, which is a free version of RHEL, okay, and our salespeople go out into potential customers, and the potential customer says, I don't really need RHEL because I have CentOS, and it does the same thing, and I know how to use it. Drives our salespeople crazy. Especially when, in the old days, it really drove them crazy because it was like they had no influence over CentOS at all. It was just purely adversarial. Well, now CentOS is part of our company. We have hired some of the key maintainers of that project. How does that work? Why can't we make this thing go away? Why can't we stop what they're doing? Well, we don't really want to because that's not how we do this. It's a nuanced approach. Salespeople, and this is where my physics background comes in, so be prepared to go to sleep at any point in this presentation from now on. Salespeople think of this as a sale as they're hitting a basket. Actually, the original metaphor I had was shooting a gun, but I thought, nah, I'll stick with sports. It's still projectile motion, okay? It's pretty simple. You hit a basket. Yes, there's skill involved. I'm not an NBA player, and I will never be confused for an NBA player. But, intuitively, it's pretty clear that after a little bit of practice, most of us can hit some baskets. Maybe not consistently well, but there's no real skill. There's no real deep skill there. You're going to need practice to do it consistently and do it better, but we intuitively, because of the way our brains work and because of spatial relationships, it's not hard to figure out if I throw the ball in a certain way, it's going to get inside a basket. The physics are relatively simple, okay? And that is a game that commercial entities, not just sales, but commercial entities in general, are trying to do. They're trying to hit that basket. In a proprietary software world, that's fairly straightforward. I have software. It has features X, Y, and Z. It costs this much. You want it or not? I'm not a salesperson, so that's really not how it goes. But basically, that's it. And then, if they make it, boom, they've hit the basket. If they don't make it, they try it again, or they go off and try to sell it to another customer. In open source land, when you have an open source project that is out there in the world with you, that you're trying to sell into. So I'm trying to sell cloud forms in a world where there's managed IQ, or I'm trying to sell I'm trying to sell SUSE Linux in a world where there's OpenSUSE. Okay, this is true for everything, not just Red Hat. Then it becomes much harder. It becomes more nuanced, actually, more challenging. This is pool. Okay, this is billiards. Okay. This is physics of billiards, and this is not even all of the diagrams that I can pull up. This is just how velocities and transfer of energy works when you hit a cue ball hits a ball and you're trying to hit the side pocket. Okay, I don't have the reduction in friction things that you get from rolling it across the felt or making a bank shot, or I don't have the sweet spot physics in there. There's a whole bunch more physics in there. I was like, no, I'm not going to throw that all in. This is just one, because billiards is a more nuanced approach. It's not shooting a basket straight. Now you got to think about bank shots. Now you got to think about putting English on the ball. Now you got to think about all these different things that you have to do to get the objective achieved. Okay, so you have to think about it in a more open and sort of a smarter way. You can't think linear anymore. Think about the value. So for us, and again to fall back on us, the value of CentOS is not immediately clear to our salespeople. It's an obstacle. Except, yeah, but now you've got people who are using CentOS. They're contributing, they're doing bug fixes for CentOS, okay? And even if they are saying now, I'm never going to buy RHEL, that could change. Because they're using, and again, I'm not trying to disparage Canonical or Ubuntu or OpenSUSE or any of those others, but let's face it, if they're using CentOS, they're one step closer to using the enterprise system that we're in, you know, and they're not going to jump ship and go over to SUSE, you know, so that sounds terrible and pragmatic, but it's true, and they're there. You know, but those users are contributing something. The CentOS community, because they're involved in bug fixes, because they're involved in feature requests and things like that, that will eventually trickle back all the way upstream to Fedora, okay, which is the real upstream for all of these projects. So now you've got a circle going. It's not just upstream to downstream. Now you've got actually a way back up to the upstream. You know, it's nuanced. Okay. So this is sort of where we have to kind of take our commercial companies. This is where we have to lead them. We have to say to them, it's not a straightforward linear progression from build a product, sell the product. Now it's like we have to get these communities engaged, and we have to make sure they're engaged. Very few, went ahead a little bit. Very few of us have like built a town, okay? But hypothetically, let's say we build a town. We build roads, we build water pipes, we build electricity, we build, you know, we get everything. We've got schools, we've got the post office, we've got the town hall, we've got the town jail, you know, whatever. We build all this infrastructure and say that. If you look at your community right now, and I'm sure all of us, wherever we're from and whatever nationality, would be able to say this is true, that you would be able to say in your community, there are a whole bunch of people that just want to live there. Don't bother me. I want to live in my house or my apartment. I'm going to pay my taxes. I expect the police to show up when I call them. I expect the fire department to show up. I expect the water company to fix my water, etc. Okay, that's how most communities are. I'm just going to be a user of this community. But I guarantee you, you all know people in your community who are much more civic-minded. And they see something and they say, you know what, I really want a dog park here. Or I don't want that factory here. I'm going to sign a petition. I'm going to get people going. They're more civic-minded, okay? They want to change the community. They want to be a part of leading that community and not be politicians necessarily, although that is a way to do it too. But they want to be involved. They want to be active. And we, as commercial entities, have got to provide an outlet for being involved in that way. Yes, most people will just say, I want to just be here, hang out, and be cool, right? But some people are always going to be wanting to change it and improve it. And you may not like the direction of those improvements, but that is sort of how it has to go. You don't want to manage a community like this. Okay, you cannot have hierarchical, top-down, you know, rigid management structures and governance. You can do that on the technical side for, you know, maintaining and approving patches. Okay, yeah, because sometimes it's always got to be somebody who decides. I'm not talking about patch maintenance and technical stuff. I'm talking about governance. Okay, you can't do that. Even in the Linux community, which is regarded as a benevolent dictatorship, people have voices. People can be heard. You can change Linus Torvalds' mind. I ain't saying it's easy, but he's open to it because he's smart. He knows a lot about Linux, and he has very set ideas about some things, but I also understand that I've seen him change his mind. You can do it. Okay, so commercial entities get really over-controlling sometimes. Don't be this person. You want to inspire. Although please don't do this, because I saw this and I was like, no, this is just too happy, you know, whatever. You know, this is team building and it scares me. But it's still true. You want to inspire your community, because the difference is you build a community with inspiration, and you're going to inspire people to build a community like this. This is not uniform. This is not necessarily pretty, but this is a community that works. Okay? If you build a community through management, and strict controls, this is what you get. You get Disneyland. Disneyland is the most scrupulously managed community of people on the planet. Epcot Center, very few people know this. Epcot Center was originally designed to actually be a town. It was the most planned community in the world. And it would have all these cool future features. And yeah, it would have an amusement park in the middle of it to sort of kind of showcase these things and generate some revenue. You know, Disney is all about building the strongest, the most overly managed community as possible. And those who are familiar with Disney know that there's not a lot of freedom there. You know, yeah, there's a cool mouse, but that's all you got. You know, so governance is key. The key to the best value and delivering value for your business and making sure that your community growth is not a drain on your bottom line is to let it go. You know, it's the line from the song, if you love something, set it free. Okay, and that will work. And that sounds cliche and corny, but that is definitely the most true thing you will have about community in the business world. And with that, I believe I've rambled on quite long enough, and I have a few minutes for questions. So, if everybody's awake, yes, Mr. Wally. I'll repeat your question.
Just an observation. The value of community to a company also includes a certain amount of stickiness and inertia. You can go all the way and say brand loyalty as well. That's kind of everybody's tribal, but people don't like change. So there's that huge wave of people that have decided on Fedora or decided on CentOS are not using the other guy's product.
Right. Okay. So.
That's value.
That is value. I'm not trying to argue that point. How is that different from loyalty that I was talking about before? Or I'm not sure I understand the nuance.
It's more people don't like change.
Okay.
Loyalty is a very positive thing. I want to be part of that tribe.
Okay.
But most people, it's the newer adoption curve.
Okay.
Newer adoption curve for technology. Most people sit on the boring side of that.
Okay, and I believe and so just to repeat it for the camera in case it didn't come through, Stephen's talking about how inertia is part of community too, and stickiness, and people are not the unwillingness to change is a factor, and actually, yeah, now I get that because I live in South Bend, Indiana, where it's ridiculously cold in the winter, and I'm on the wrong side of Lake Michigan, and I get dumped with feet of snow, feet, not inches, feet of snow. Usually every winter. And yet, a sane person would move. I would live here. This is really nice here, by the way, those of you who are local to Southern California, so I'm rocking it out, but why do I not move? Because if I understand Stephen's point correctly, I have inertia. It's home, and I'm familiar with it. I'm going to stay there, until I win the Powerball, and then I'm out of here. So we're out of there. Any other questions or comments? And comments are very welcome because this is sort of we're building this presentation. Yes? Okay. Okay, that's a great question. And repeating the question, um, a lot of what I've said has applied to businesses that are directly involved with open source projects like this in building communities. The question was, can that also apply to other businesses who might be on the outside of such communities and how they relate and what's the value to them to interact with communities? I think that people on the businesses on the outside will get as the same kind of value, if not more, of being a part of a community, even if they're not directly involved in it, okay? Because you as a user, you get a lot of value being part of community. You get support, you get people to help you, you get that, the brand, that being part of a tribe and everything like that, whatever you want to do. And I think outside businesses will get the same value, if not more. You know, if I'm a small business and I'm running MySQL, okay, as a database, database server or something like that. Or if I'm running, an email server or whatever like that, it's awesome if I can be a part of a community and just ask for help and not pay anybody for it. It might not be the best help. It might not be timely. Like it's, if I paid somebody to help me, I want an answer in an hour because I got to go. But if I've been part of this community as a business entity, and they know I'm part of it, they're going to be more willing to help me because I'm just not coming in and saying, hey, I need help. If I've been part of that, then they're going to answer me faster. Because this small business, they've hosted our meetings or something like that. There's a lot of give and take with that kind of thing. And you can call it being favorites or whatnot, but there's a lot of you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. So that's one benefit I can think of off the top of my head. If you are a business participating in a community like that, and you use that software, if you're active and people know you're active, they're going to help you a lot faster. That's human nature. Kind of out of time. One more question real quick.
I was saying, actually, I was going to say the same thing, that I noticed a lot of the presentations based on kind of the assumption that the business basically owns the brand and owns the open source that they were releasing to a community and building a community around it. And there are many cases where nobody owns the
Right.
community per se, whether it's OpenStack or whatever. And then you have to start looking at it slightly differently about what are the benefits to you as a corporation versus a heavily given community like that, where you have no control.
Right, exactly, and that gets back into the that argument, and that's a very straightforward Machiavellian argument, and I'm sure there's a more nuanced way of saying it, but I think that in for a penny, in for a pound is a valid way of doing this. So, well, thank you all for your comments and questions and your attendance today. I appreciate it. Go eat.